right, good afternoon, everybody. We have a couple announcements before we're going to get started with Mike here. And this one is being webcast. So there's a couple things I have to do for the people that are watching us. And one of them is if you are an ASHA member watching remotely via webcast, CEUs are not available through Penn State or Patton. As an attendee of the webcast, you may print a copy of your attendance certificate and submit that certificate to ASHA certification directly for contact maintenance hours. If you are in the in-person audience, so if you're here right now attending, you can just please submit the bubble sheet for the conference directions prior to leaving the conference on your last day here. Sorry, I'm out of breath because I just ran out to check when snacks are coming, guys. Okay, so my name is Cindy. I'm facilitating for Mike today, and we have another one of us in the back that's Dean. So if you need anything along the next couple hours in the afternoon, please feel free to shout out for us. The exhibit hall is open until 5:30 today. Melissa Nossick will be presenting recent developments at the BACB from 4:15 to 5:15 today. And remember, in order to get any kind of continuing education credits, you must complete and hand in a verification form at the registration desk prior to departing on your last day of attendance at the conference. This is where you'll put those codes that I'll give you at the end of the presentation. You'll need all those codes after the end of every session to be able to get any of those credits. You can also access the PowerPoint for this session as any other ones via the conference website or the Groupio app. And if anybody needs help with any of the Groupio apps or anything, please feel free to ask anybody with a staff badge and we'll help you out with that. And we're also asking that upon completion of each presentation that you give us feedback for that session via the new Groupio mobile app. And I think that is all my announcements, and now we can leave it up to Mike. Mike has a wonderful bio that we're not going to read. You guys can read in the app, but I met Mike in 2010, and my life has never been the same since I met this man. His official bio, it doesn't even mention the fact that he will do whatever it takes to not only help the adults who work with children, but to do whatever, go whatever length necessary to make a child laugh. This includes songs about beavers, including scripted motions. He'll let them play with his beard. I've seen them all do these things. I will forever owe him for all he has given me throughout the years. So without further ado, here's Mike.
What Cindy didn't say is it's an honor being introduced by her. I have seen Cindy as a teacher and as a behavior analyst, and she is like top of the line and has done remarkable work. Thank you, Cindy. It means a lot, you saying those things. Welcome. Okay, so this is a session on the evidence base for educational interventions geared to parents. So how many people in here are parents? Okay, good. How many who are not parents or students who are professionals? Okay, good. Okay, good. So the bulk of people are parents. Hey, how are you? Good to see you, Mike. Oh, I failed to turn it on, I think. There we go.
Okay, let's see if it's not muted.
Too many buttons here.
I know, too many buttons. I believe that should be good.
Okay. So working now? Okay, good. All right. So of the parents who are here, how many are parents of high school age individuals with autism? Okay. Elementary age, kindergarten through 6th. Okay. And I missed intermediate school. A couple intermediate school. Okay. How many parents of young children birth to kindergarten? Okay. All right. Birth to 3. A couple. Okay. Wow. Okay. Good. So some of the videos I'll show later on have to do with high school age interventions, and that's okay because you need to know that. You need to know where things are going with interventions. And I don't have a whole lot of videos. I'm mostly going to be talking and hopefully entertaining some questions along the way as they come up. But what I really want to do is go over the fact that, when we talk about evidence, it's really an issue of outcomes. And the evidence that matters the most is when there is somebody who is committed to working with your child and whose time is dedicated to making a difference for you, there has to be evidence that when they work with your child, when they provide these interactions that are so important for outcomes, that your child is somehow changed, that as a result of interacting with the professionals, your child can do something that they couldn't do before. And that's going to be the theme that runs throughout almost everything I say through this presentation. That what we're really looking to do is to really give you some information that will help you make decisions as to what kind of interventions are a starting point. But along the way, wherever you start has to be evaluated by the progress your child is making. And there has to be systems of evidence that demonstrate that what is going on with your child's education program is actually working, that there's progress being made. Now, it's important that the things we're talking about teaching children to do are not things that are trivial. We're looking to make sure that together schools and parents collaborate in order to get outcomes to where a child is learning skills that will help them achieve meaningful outcomes in life, where they're able to do something, to take care of themselves better, to contribute to society, to become active citizens, to be able to interact with people at a level they're comfortable with, but that is not going to be problematic for other people as well. You know, when I'm talking about changing people's skill sets, I'm not talking about changing who the person is or altering their basic personality in any way. What I'm talking about is the idea that, you know, everything we do in life is a skill. It's a skill. It involves us in some way doing something in a way that demonstrates some effective change in the world. And as a result, it makes things better for us and for the people we're with. And if we don't know how to do things that makes our life better, it's going to be a problem. Okay? And that's what education is about. It's about increasing competency. And not necessarily, I mean, that will obviously include careful consideration of the individual preferences of a child and the individual circumstances children grow up in. And that's really important for evidence, that we need evidence that gets those kind of outcomes. Additionally, there is a lot of evidence that suggests that individuals with autism have a higher probability of engaging in behaviors that are not easy for other people to cope with and end up not working against the interest of the individual with autism. So we also need outcomes that reduce those kind of problem behaviors as well. And without that kind of interaction where we teach and the child learns skills that improve their life to help them do things better, but also reduce problems behaviors is central. And that's where I'm going to be getting at here. So the idea here is there's a lot more in terms of your family life with the children you love than just school. Okay? This session is going to be focused on the educational components of helping children with autism. It's not going to cover all the other issues related to evidence for various medical procedures and so forth. Not that those things aren't important. It's just the scope of this conference relates to education. We really want to focus on how do we make the experience your children have in school settings be successful and important to you. So basically, why do we have schools in the first place? Well, schools are set up to help children become better participants in their community, to be able to be informed about our culture and the political system, and to be employable so they can contribute to society. And that is a critical system to have. I really believe that schooling is really important, but it has to be practical. We have to be teaching children skills that will make a difference. And therefore, our educational programs should demonstrate those kind of outcomes. And those kind of outcomes are going to need to be tiered depending upon a child's rate of progress and the skills a child brings to the school. We have to start at levels of competence. What can the child do already, and how can we build on it? And to do that, we need teachers who are engaging in teaching behaviors that can be observed and measured, so that if your child goes to school and the teachers say they're going to help the child learn to talk about something, to describe something, you should be able to ask the teacher, well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to get this child to begin describing a chair? And what is a chair? The teacher should have procedures. She should be able to say, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to set up the instruction. This is how we're going to measure whether he's gaining the skills to talk all about the chair, that you sit on it, that it has armrest and a back, and this chair has wheels and has a leather back, and all the things you can say about this chair. How do you get a child to do all that stuff? Well, teachers should know how to do that. That's what they're paid for. They should be able to tell you how they're teaching something. And then they should be able to give you really specific information on how your child's performing. Did they learn the back of the chair today? Did they learn to identify the action of sitting? Can they look and say, sitting, standing, Dean standing, you're sitting? Have they learned those kind of specific skills? So this whole idea is that outcomes and interventions are at a practical level. Okay? And when I say that, it has to be practical in a way that we can talk about what was done and replicate it. And so that if somebody tells me I am teaching Cindy to tell me that this is her pocketbook, and somebody says, that's your job, teach her how to say pocketbook. Well, I got to figure out how I'm going to do that with her. If I say pocketbook, can she say pocketbook back? Okay, I'm checking to see if my teaching procedures really match what I'm asking her to learn. And then if my friend McKelly comes in and says, hey, Mike, I want to see you teach it. When I teach it, I should follow those procedures that I spelled out. Okay? So in this case, she can repeat pocketbook when I say pocketbook, so I could do something like this. What is it? Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
What is it?
Pocketbook. And
I have very set procedures, and McKelly could look at me and say, yep, that's it. That's just what you said you were going to do, and you did it. Okay? Because actually, where you want instruction to go, your outcomes that are going to be proven, the evidence of teaching outcomes are, if I run that procedure with her, down the road when I say, what is it?
Pocketbook.
I should get pocketbook. I should be able to get the behavior that I taught. Not only that, if I teach her enough things, she should be able to generalize that to where, I haven't stolen somebody's pocketbook in a long time. Can I steal your pocketbook? What is it? Thank you so much, Dolores. We actually need teaching procedures that not only get her knowing that that's a pocketbook, but knowing pocketbook in general, so she can take an idea and then transfer it to something she has never seen before. We need that kind of generative learning. And those are the outcomes, and that's just one example of a skill, by the way. We need a whole range of skills we're teaching, because learning to talk and communicate effectively is a complex set of skills, as most of us don't realize. Most of us don't realize how complicated it is to learn to talk, because how many in here, parents in here, have typically developing children? Okay. My son was typically developing, and I have worked with children who have had challenges related to social communication for my entire adult career. And when my son, just a couple days ago, by the way, no, it's a long time. My son's not like this big. But when he was real little and starting to talk, it was like it just came out of him. It was like magic. And he just learned to talk. It just, how does he learn these new words so quickly with hardly, and I go to work and see some of the children I'm working with, and the attention to detail necessary to get language developed in children who don't have language. That is a reason why we don't pay attention to the details of experience that teach children how to be effective communicators. Okay, that is the source of the problem. We just see children grow up and learn to talk, and it's like, how did you teach them to talk? And if I ask some of you, how did you teach your typical child to talk? It's probably hard to come up with an answer. Well, we talk to them a lot, But beyond that, you don't see the specifics of the child learning pocketbook the way I just demonstrated how I might teach somebody who couldn't learn to say pocketbook to teach pocketbook, to say pocketbook. Okay, so my big point here is that outcomes of instruction on a day-to-day basis should be verified. We should be able to say how we're teaching something, and we should see that teaching it actually gets the result. Okay? Now, I just demonstrated something here with Cindy. I picked up the pocketbook and I said, what is it? Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
That is a set of formal procedures that I did not invent. It's a simple procedure. It looks pretty simple what I did, right? Okay. But those simple procedures came from a scientific endeavor to understand learning that has been taking place for quite a number of years, and it's just been growing steadily over the years, our range of knowledge as to how teaching impacts learning of social communicative skills. Okay, I'm talking a little bit ahead of myself here, and I hate to use words that I didn't define. So when I say social communication, the reason I'm talking so much about that is one of the defining characteristics of autism are differences in development of social communicative skills. Social communication means that the way you interact with another person isn't as typical as what other people might do. And the communication end is when you do certain things, you talk a certain way, other people respond consistently to it. So that if your interactions with other people and the way you're saying things aren't effective, that leads to some challenges in life. Okay? So when I say social communication, what I'm talking about is differences in the way you interact with somebody and talk to them. It's a core deficit of autism. And in many ways, it is something that the amount of knowledge as to addressing those kind of needs has been growing across time. Okay? My point. If I'm helping Cindy develop social communicative skills and I'm following a procedure that involves a prompted response, so I want her to look at this and say pocketbook when I say what is it? And then I prompt her. Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
Where did that come from? I didn't make it up. It came from other people who have developed interventions, tested it out, and tried it. Okay, this is the point I'm getting at here. There are two sources of intervention you need to be aware of. One source of intervention is going to be scientific findings that are published in peer-reviewed journals. Okay, so I'll try to go over this quickly here, but basically the way publication works is somebody goes out and gets all the necessary permissions and consent and complies with appropriate ethical standards for doing research, gets all that set up in advance. They also then design a study where they're interested in a particular area. They design that study. They then decide how they're going to analyze their study results. They figure out, am I going to do it with one child, lots of children? If I do it with lots of children, how many children are going to be representative so that what we're learning applies to as many different people as possible? Okay, so somebody will go out and do all that legwork before doing the study. Then they actually do the study. And what happens? They either get results that make sense, in which case they write everything up and they submit it to a journal, or their results make no sense at all and they just put it on the back burner and don't do anything about it, which may be a problem because sometimes we learn the most from things that don't work. And those kind of things have a tendency not to get published as much. Those studies that don't work. Although recently there's been a couple journals that are publishing studies that show results that weren't what people expected. Okay, but anyway, so the study works, they submit it for publication, and then it goes to a peer review process in which other people who are skilled and knowledgeable in the field and have lots of information review the article and say, yeah, this makes sense. Everything is in place. They've met all the standards of good research. Let's print it in our journal. And then it's printed online and in paper journals these days. Okay, so it gets disseminated. And then other people use the results of those studies to make decisions as to what to do in applied settings sometimes. And it's that kind of work that establishes the evidence base for effective treatments. Generally, there are two ways those kind of studies work. You got large N groups, which is often called large N randomly assigned control groups. Bear with me, folks. I'll try not to be too technical here. But you just need to know this stuff. What they do is they take large groups of individuals they're studying, and whatever they're studying, they run it with them, and then they compare it to some other group who differs in some characteristics, such as children who got the treatment, children who didn't get the treatment, children with autism, typical children. And they make these comparisons, and then the large group data, if there is significant differences through mathematical tests, statistical tests, we can say, well, this study is pretty confidently describes whatever it is we're interested in. So autism interventions are often evaluated, or actually, well, let me repeat this. Let me edit what I just said. Some autism interventions have gone through that kind of rigorous testing. There's not many studies that have been studied for educational outcomes involving large group comparison studies. There have been some, but not many. And the random assignment simply means that the people who are conducting the actual intervention don't know if the children are in the study group or not. There's also interventions that involve repeated single subjects as a way of looking at an effect. So if I teach Cindy about pocketbook using the technique I just used, I get her results. I then teach Amy the same way, then McKelly, then Elena, and then Carolyn, and I teach all of them, and all the results show a similar pattern. That's a repeated demonstration of single subject. Okay? So all of that kind of science-based peer review work is one kind of evidence, a very important kind of evidence. But there's another kind of evidence, and that's what I was talking about right out of the box, that you need to have evidence that whatever is taught to a student works. That's a second kind of evidence that it often goes by the wayside, and we don't look at it as closely as what we should. The reason being, if you get a large-scale study where you look and we say, okay, I'm going to teach using the push-to-chair method, where I push Cindy around the room and then ask her what it is, okay? And I do that with 1,000 kids. Well, maybe it works with 500 of them, which is a significant finding, but then you have 500 kids it didn't work with. How do you know? Maybe it's chance. Maybe that's complete chance. Or maybe there's something different about the 500 kids it worked with. Pushing in the chair worked. And I'm making up pushing in the chair. It's not a real intervention. Don't go pushing your kids in chairs. Unless you're doing it as a reinforcer. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. A reinforcer is something that happens after the child does something you want that will make sure that they do it again. So if I use reinforcement, that's what I'm talking about. It's just a change in the world that makes things better, so you're more likely to do that again in the future. So anyway, how do we then determine if Cindy is in the 500 kids who it worked with or 500 it didn't? We still have to come back and check. Well, let's say it worked with 980 of 1,000 kids. What if your child is one of those 20 who it didn't work with? And you never know which ones it's going to be. Or not never, but often you may not. That is why we need measures of individual effectiveness and evidence of practice outcomes. So outcomes for the individual learner are what seems to matter the most. This doesn't mean that we should pick interventions. And this is a big message for all you parents out there. Picking interventions should not be a willy-nilly thing. Well, I like brushing therapy, so I'm going to brush my child for a half hour and see if that helps them learn to talk. Okay? Well, why would you start with brushing? Just bear with me. Why would somebody start with that? Well, because it makes sense. Because when I brush, I rewire the child's nervous system. It provides sensory stimulation that rewires the nervous. So let's brush the child to get them to learn to talk and say pocketbook. Well, okay. Maybe. But why start with brushing? Is there evidence? Is there a study out there that has shown that when you brush, the child learns to say pocketbook better? Or is calmer? Or has some kind of effect? Well, there have been studies on brushing, and they haven't shown much reliable results. Okay, so I'm not going to start with an intervention that there's not much evidence for. Okay, I'm not going to take my car to be fixed by somebody who is a chef. Chefs get outcomes. Chefs are good, and sometimes we all like being brushed, okay? But that's not where I'm going to fix learning to talk. I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start with something for which there's some evidence that something has worked. And that's an important consideration. What I'm getting at here is that there is a starting point for interventions. Okay? When we're selecting interventions, we should look for interventions that have some level of support, that somebody has already used those interventions and has shown some degree of outcome. The child has actually performed better as a result of that. Now, I'm going to add to that, though. So maybe you do go to the science base, and you work through all those, and you're still not getting results, okay? Then maybe, okay, You've tried all this stuff. Maybe it is this brushing stuff that rewires the nervous system. Let's try it. I think it was Carl Sagan who said this, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So if you're going to this idea of brushing, then you still have to get that individual outcome. When I brush, is there a change in language development as a result of that? You should get that measurable kind of outcome. It's just a very practical a step to take, okay? So interventions, when we're selecting interventions, it probably makes the most sense to look for things for which there's a relative degree of support. With that said, when I'm talking about proof and evidence, I'm sort of making it sound like there's this will always work and this will never work. And it's not that way at all, folks. It's just there are certain things that are more likely to work and some that are less likely to work, and you're better off starting with those that are more likely to work. Let me show you a little slide here that might relate to this problem. Anybody here ever hear of Isaac Asimov? Okay, good. Some of you guys. Okay, I, Robot. He wrote that. You know, the movie. He was a science fiction writer, and he wrote all these science books too. I think he wrote more science books than science fiction, if I'm not mistaken. But a brilliant, sort of odd fellow. But anyway, he wrote a book in 1988 called The Relativity of Wrong. And if one says that the Earth is flat, well, that's wrong, right? Every bit of scientific evidence and any measure that we could use, including shots from outer space and airplanes globally circling, everything we know shows the Earth is not flat, okay? But what a lot of people don't know, in that second picture up there, the world is round. But round implies this perfect spherical kind of shape. Well, the world isn't really round. It bulges at the middle. It's pulled by the gravitational forces of the sun and the moon. So our planet actually has a little bulge in the middle. Sort of like my wife says I'm getting when I eat too much. But this bulge is caused by gravitational effects. So saying the Earth is round is wrong. Saying the Earth is flat is wrong. But they're not equal. You're a heck of a lot closer if you say the world is round. There's a relativity of outcome in data and evidence. Evidence isn't always clear-cut, and we have to be aware of that and be sort of reasonable how we interpret things. But if I was planning to take a trip to China right now, and I had to choose between flat or round world to get there, guess which one I'm picking to start with? Okay? Now, my trip might be off in time a little bit because of that bulge, but I'll get there. I'm not getting there on a flat Earth. So, this is a quote from one of the summaries of evidence I'm going to be talking about. It's from the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. And they basically say, many interventions exist for autism spectrum disorder, yet scientific research has found only some of these interventions to be effective. The interventions that researchers have shown to be effective are called evidence-based practice. One reason for evidence-based practice is because, by law, teaching practices must be based on evidence of effectiveness. So if you look at, how many of you have gone through the IEP process? Okay, of course. Okay, so the IEP process, one of the things that Pennsylvania's Chapter 14 guidelines mandates by law is that educational interventions, objectives on the IEP must be measurable. We have to be able to say whether when we do something in an educational program that's guided by the IEP, that there are measurable outcomes. That the child actually, and measurable means that the child actually does something different as a result of teaching, and we can count it. Okay? That's part of the law. And that law is derived from the federal law, which, Italy? There's not, I don't think. Is there? A law for evidence-based practice, measurable outcomes in education? No, okay. So it's not universal. We should be glad to be in America that there's the IDEA, right, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which Pennsylvania state law is basically a derivation of the federal law and is consistent with it. The federal law also mandates measurable outcomes. So you need to get, in order for schools to accomplish that, they need to pick their interventions from programs that have evidence. Okay? So, what does the evidence say in terms of interventions that are generally effective? What are these evidence-based practices, and where do they come from? Well, here's a list. It's a little different than the list I submitted this morning. There's a couple more on here. But all of these different lists provide summaries or statements regarding scientific evidence that has been accumulated regarding what works for students with autism. I'm going to probably talk a lot about the Maine Department and the National Autism Centers. They're both pretty thorough. The National Autism Center's research summary was one of the largest of its kind ever developed. It was first done in 2009, and it looked at all studies published between 1957 and 2007, and it reviewed thousands of studies. Thousands. And eventually, those studies were looked at in terms of how sound were they? Did they make sense? Were the results verifiable? Were the measurements done consistently? So the panel really looked at all of these articles in a very painstaking, consistent fashion. Okay? Then what they did was they narrowed it down to 953 studies, I think, something along those lines. And then from those 953 that had sound design, were good studies, they said, well, which ones demonstrate that interventions work? And they came up with about 11 different interventions that were shown to work. Basically, it was 7,000, and I said 900, it was 775, I'm sorry. What they found is that of the studies that showed outcome, almost all of the effective treatments were based exclusively on designs that were derived from applied behavior analysis. I'm going to talk a lot about what is applied behavior analysis in a few minutes. And basically, one-third of the other one-third were all had components of a behavior analysis in it. In other words, they looked at carefully defining what was being taught and what was being learned. So what I want to get here, when I say applied behavior analysis, some of you may have an idea of what that is. Some of you don't have an idea. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what applied behavior analysis is. At the simplest level, applied behavior analysis is simply where you decide that what you're going to be concerned about is what the person does. What are they able to say? What are they able to write? What are they able to do in terms of learning to tie a tie, play a piano, operate a computer? What are the movements and the skills that a person must have to do those things? And the main concern is what the person does, okay? And then it ties behavior analysis then ties what the person does to what's going on around them in the world. So that if I poke this chair, I'm not going to be able to change the screen. It doesn't work. I want the screen to change. Poking the chair doesn't work. So if I want a practical outcome, I have to poke the button up here that advances the screen. Okay? So if we're talking about screen-changing behavior, we define what it is we want the person to do. Walk up to the screen, find the button, push the button, and then the world changes. Voila, I push the button. What happens the next? Watch, it's amazing. The next screen comes up, and it's predictable. If it wasn't predictable, if that skill, if my behavior, the things I do in the world, didn't predictably cause that screen to move on, if sometimes it moved on, sometimes it didn't. Well, computers are sort of funny because sometimes I get error messages. But most things in life are very predictable, and actually computers are too, because then you have to go through a whole lot of other behaviors to figure out, to get the right response. But it's all doing something in relation to this system. Okay? The idea here is that we're all, every one of us, from our moment of conception, are in an environment. And that the way we are built, we're built to interact with the world, right? Why do we have eyes? To see, ears to hear. I mean, it sounds corny, but it's true. And our hands are able to manipulate things. We don't have hands to think. We don't use, we have vocal folds because it manipulates sound. Okay, what I'm getting at here is the idea that behavior analysis is very concerned about what we do and the conditions under which we do it, right? And if we could then change the conditions, we might change what somebody does. And we could help them to learn to do something better. If we artfully look at that relation, that's all behavior analysis is. And I think when you look at the kind of outcomes that are listed in almost every one of those meta-analysis, they all point in the same direction. And I don't think the specific results, and I'm speaking my own opinion here a little bit, be wary of that. Be wary of opinion. But, you look at all the studies, what's the commonality between them is what I just said. They look at the behavior and they systematically alter the environment to change what a person does. Now, this doesn't mean that people who are concerned with behavior analysis don't care about things like feeling or thinking. It's just behavior analysts look at it a little different. Thinking isn't something that goes on in another place in another world. Thinking is something we do. It's behavior. Okay? So, Carolyn, my friend, if I said to you, what am I thinking? Oh, I wish we could shoot her face up there. She's saying, I don't have a clue what you're thinking. Okay? But if I stood here this way and said, boy, I got to reread that Isaac Asimov book. It was pretty interesting. What am I thinking?
The book.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the book, right? Why do you know what I'm thinking about? Because I did something. Okay, if I do this, what do you think I'm thinking about now? The lights. I'm thinking about the lights. How do you know what somebody's thinking? You never know what's going on inside the skin. You have to make those judgments. It's not that thinking isn't important. Thinking is something we do. Okay? It's as much a part of our activity, interacting with the world, as anything else. Feeling is the same way. Feelings are behaviors too. We tend to talk about feelings causing behavior. But behavior analysts are a little weird. They look at it a little differently. Okay, so I'm standing here right now, and in through the doors behind Dean quickly gets out of the way, and in through the doors comes a bear. And the bear comes up to me, and I run. As I run, I'm feeling afraid. But I'm not running because I'm afraid. I'm not running because I'm afraid. Why am I running? Because there's a bear. Okay? So, in our popular culture, we tend to talk, well, why did Johnny hit Mary? Well, he doesn't like her. He didn't feel good. We make all these guesses about what the child is doing, and we don't look at what happened between the two people. What did that person do? What did this person do? And that kind of analysis takes time. It's hard to work it out because we have to be such careful observers. But when we look at it that way, we get results. And that's what this data is saying, that when you look at interventions as an interaction between the teacher and the child, and as a result of that interaction, the child does something that's observable and measurable, that's when interventions work. Okay? And there are just, I have 2 recent publications up in my hotel room. It's actually down the hall in my hotel room. And they're full of people who are studying these kind of relations between what do people do and for some pretty complicated stuff. I'm going to show you some complicated stuff later on to show how it works so it's not too simple. But the idea here is that ABA is not a thing. Okay? It's not a thing. It's not a set protocol. It's a kind of analysis. So we use this process, this analysis of behavior analysis, to figure out if something is working or not. So teaching, without a doubt, is a behavior change process. We have to look and say, if we're really getting some results from somebody, what did they do different after we've done our part? Does it change? Does it work? And a lot of times interventions won't work. Okay? I can't tell you how many times I thought, wow, well, this makes sense. Here's the study says that if we use backward chaining to teach the child to wash their hands, we should get results. And I work with this one child, and backward chaining, don't worry about what that is, just let's assume it. I do it, and it falls on its face. Sometimes things don't work. And you got to figure out, and that's where behavior analysis comes in. Why didn't it work? What in the process didn't work? So did I not teach the child effectively the very last step that I was supposed to teach? Did I need to do more teaching? What were the variables that led to effective outcomes? Okay, I'm just going to cover this slide. Behavior analysis, here is what it is. When you hear applied behavior analysis, I'm going to start with the behavior, which I already covered. Behavior means we're concerned about what the child does in some observable, measurable way, and the setting in which they do it. Okay, because if they tended to do that behavior in this setting, and a similar setting occurs, you'd predict that the same behavior will occur. And that's behavior analysis shows that our behavior is regular in some way. We tend to do things the same way over and over. Not exactly the same, but similar ways. Applied means we're taking the study of behavior and environment, the situations in which we do something, and we're using it for good, to help people learn things that are going to make a practical difference in their lives. We're helping children learn to do things that will help them do even more things better in the future. Analytical means that in the field of behavior analysis, there is an attempt to not trust ourselves, okay? Because I could tell you all sorts of stuff today, and you could leave here saying, well, that Miklas guy, he said some good stuff. But don't believe what I say, believe what I do, okay? And if anything I'm suggesting works, you need to show that it works with your child. And teachers need to show that. So the analysis of applied behavior analysis simply means that we are concerned about measuring what goes on and proving that things really happened, rather than guessing. That's not an easy part. Technological, by the way, in this case, doesn't mean that we're doing things with machines. What it means is that if I teach Cindy to say pocketbook, going back to this example, and I say, what is it? Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
She echoes me. And what is it?
Pocketbook.
And I'm able to get her to start saying that on her own, that I could come up and I could tell my friend Monica, here's how I ran it. Here's exactly what I did. I presented the task that I wanted her to do. Clear. I held up the pocketbook and said, what is it? Right after I said that, I used a prompt. It was something to make sure that the behavior would occur. I told Cindy to say pocketbook when I said it. What is it? And then prompt pocketbook. Okay, you got that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Could you go over and do that with her? What I just did? Yeah. Just do exactly what I did. This is technology. Thank you, Cindy. You're such a friend. That's a real friend. Somebody who walks in front of all these people. No, what? And ask her again without the prompt.
What is it?
Boom. So it's replicable. Thank you, Cynthia. It's replicable. Yeah, all-star. You gotta, if your teacher says, you say to a teacher, how are you teaching it? They need to be able to tell you and then demonstrate and have somebody else show you. Otherwise, how do you know they're not doing something different every time? That's the technology of ABA. There's got to be this replicability, this transfer of whatever works across people, which is another big message, by the way. I keep going off on tangents. We might not get through the PowerPoint. That's okay. It's a really important thing. Beware of the situation where you're with somebody and their reason for doing what they do is because they're special. I can do this and nobody else can. You know, social communicative skills, we got to work together. We're all connected people. And you know, when I would watch this dear lady here teach, it was awesome because she had a whole group of people who were helping her, who all knew to do what she did, and they talked and they communicated. And when somebody didn't follow the technology, Cindy was there. Hey, remember to do your transfer trial, and they would pick it up and do it. You know, there's I often consult in school classes. And when I walk in the classroom and nobody seems to care that I walked in the door because instruction is going on and the teachers are working and the kids are happy and there's a lot of good things going on to make the world better for them when they're learning. And I walk in and everybody ignores me. That's a good sign. When I walk in the classroom and the teacher says to me, oh, you're going to disrupt stuff. Don't look this way. Sit over there. That says that there's just the focus isn't on instruction. Okay, we should be looking for people to work together. I'm not saying that kids aren't distracted by people walking in the room, especially me. I'm sometimes too goofy in classrooms. Never, right? So, no. The idea, though, is that technology in behavior analysis means you write things in a way that other people can do them, and you should be able to replicate the effect. And if we're getting meaningful results for the kids we care for, we want that effect to be replicable too. That the child can, whatever we teach them to do, they don't do only in this narrow setting, they do in a lot of different settings. Conceptually systematic basically means that you have a certain set of principles that guide you. Like one principle I said earlier, was everybody here at Pat Fryman's talk this morning? He never used this word, but this is what he was talking about. He was talking about reinforcement. Reinforcement is a consequence that increases the future probability of any behavior that occurred before it. What do I mean by that? If I sit in a chair and the chair supports my weight, next time I'm tired, it's more likely I'm going to sit on the chair. If that's reinforcement, the chair reinforced my sitting behavior. If I'm going to write with this pen, and I pull this pen out, and I push the button, and I start writing, and marks occur on the paper, my writing behavior has been reinforced by ink going on the paper. Okay, so reinforcement is a huge idea. That's why Pat Fryman talked about it so much this morning. And it's such an important thing. When things get better for us after we do something, We tend to do that same thing again and again. It makes the world go round. When I say that, I'm sort of talking about people. But does anybody here work in technology? Dean does. Okay, of course you do, Dean. Okay, so the idea is that if you're writing programs related to artificial intelligence, right? How do you get machines to learn to do stuff? Well, what's coming about is most learning systems are based on reinforcement principles. When the code effectively programs for something that does something that's effective in the program, that the program learns. If it gets results and it works, it does more of that. That's reinforcement principles. So not only is it working with people, but we're developing machines that are reinforcement-based too. But the machines are working that way because the principle works. When things get better, you do things more often, right? I think all of us can say that. Okay, so where am I getting at here? Reinforcement is a concept. It suggests that if you do something and things get better for you, in those similar circumstances in the future, you're more likely to do that again. That's a basic concept. So that if you're designing instruction that's reinforcement-based, so I'm going to teach the child to operate the pen. When they push the button, they should be reinforced by the pen coming out. The change should occur, and they should learn that because they like to draw or color. Okay? Now, basically, most people understand reinforcement as being something that's sort of arbitrary. Okay? So that I want to teach the child to push the button because the point comes out. Well, that's ultimately the reinforcement we want to use. But if the child can't learn that right away, that pushing gets it out, I may need to use some arbitrary reinforcement, other things. So push, have an M&M, have a cracker, or I'm a beaver, you're a beaver, mama. Yes, sing a song. Okay, I could use some arbitrary reinforcement to get a behavior, but eventually I'm going to fade to where the child learns to push the button because the tip comes out so they can actually write. Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, all that was to drive home the point that ABA has a set of concepts, of principles that are consistent and that actually aren't all that complicated once you learn them. There's only a few really strong principles. The problem is you have to apply them to very complicated stuff such as children learning. And children's learning, I hope I'm not making it sound too easy here because it's a challenge. The last defining characteristic of behavior analysis is that it's effective. Okay? So that if you do all those things I just listed and it doesn't work, well, you're not really doing ABA. Because if that's the case, you should have did something up above with your analysis and change your intervention until it does work. ABA should be self-guiding. And whether we call this ABA or good instruction, it doesn't matter because good instruction works the same way. Okay? And I think that's why all the studies that consistently show the effects of applied behavior analysis in working with a population that can be a challenge to teach is because all of these things are utilized. You know what you're teaching. You teach consistently. You share the technology so other people can get it done. You use terms that are definable and everybody can understand. And you make sure your outcomes are working. The basic tenets of ABA work from antecedent behavior consequence. And under the antecedent, what happens before we do something? I've been talking about reinforcement, which happens after we do something. The basic model of ABA also looks at what happens right before. So let me go back over here to Cindy, who I've been picking on. So I hold this up. What is it? Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
Okay. So before she said pocketbook, the reason she keeps saying pocketbook, by the way, is because she has a history of when she answers questions, things have gotten better for her. So you're not seeing direct reinforcement there. But if I needed to, if I was working with a real kid, it might look something like this. What is it? Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
What is it?
Pocketbook.
Boo! Okay, so there might be some reinforcement there. Okay. Anyway, the antecedent is pretty complex. She has to hear me talk. She has to look at this. And then when I say pocketbook, she says pocketbook. So we could analyze those antecedents. I used the example of my sitting on the chair being reinforced by a load being taken off my legs. Right? When do we want to sit? Ah, that's it, when you're tired. What does being tired mean? That's like the bear. The tiredness isn't what causes, well, being tired means that you've had weight, you've been on your feet for a long time. The longer you're on your feet, the longer you're moving along, you're burning calories from your legs, and there's a physiological change in the musculature of your legs, right? And what happens is, that's motivation. There's been a physical change in the world. Time has passed where you've been on your feet for a long time, and the physiology of your legs changes, and it makes getting your legs out of that gravity valuable. Something in the world changed. And then you sit down. Sitting is reinforced by the gravity being off your legs. Hooray. You with me? Okay, so antecedents involve several things. The first is motivation. Motivation is a change in the environment that makes something else valuable. Oh, this is a big idea. There's another really big idea here. We have to basically consider motivation when we're teaching children. We want to consider, does the child want to work with us? Because when I come up to Cindy and I say, what is it, pocketbook? If she doesn't have a history of knowing, oh, after he does that, he's going to tweak my nose, he's going to give me a high five, he's going to put a sticker on the back of my hand, something's good's going to happen. If she doesn't have a history of that, my coming over is not going to establish the value of cooperation. Okay? If every time I sat on that chair, it fell to the ground and I went flying in all directions, I wouldn't sit in that chair. Okay? Motivation is a change in circumstances. Okay? So motivation is this alteration of conditions that make something valuable to us. You can't use reinforcement unless there's value in it. Okay? So I might work with my friend Joe, and I may ask Joe a question such as, what color is your car?
Gray.
He says gray, and I come in and I tickle him. Ah! Joe, if I was really doing that with Joe, this Joe, he's going to like swat me or something. Like that's, there's no motivation to get tickles because adults don't do that with each other. Okay? It's weird. And why is it weird? Because of a history of reinforcement. When people do weird stuff with you as an adult, you draw away. Okay? So motivation is really tied to your environmental history of learning for most things. So let's say you're hungry. Hungry. Okay? That will lead to you getting food. But what causes hunger? Time without food. If you go for a period without food, food becomes valuable. Then you'll do something to get the reinforcer, food. If I went out and ran around the conference center 10 times, I'm going to sweat. I'm going to lose a lot of water. All of a sudden, water will become valuable. And if somebody said, hey, go up to the refrigerator, my going to the refrigerator behavior will be reinforced by getting the water or turning on the sink. You see what I'm saying? That water isn't something that is intrinsically motivating to me. It's only motivating to me in the right circumstances. And this is true for somebody else. Jenna, help me. Jenna. Okay. Jenna, right now, could care less about the sunglasses that are on her head. Right? They're just perched there, looking awfully nice, Jenna. Awfully nice. And you go outside, and the sun's shining bright in her eyes, and a really cool look at the sunglasses up here, all of a sudden, motivation changes. It's not that Jenna has an intrinsic love of sunglasses. Okay? Or should we have them on right now? It's just the value of having the sunglasses down changes with the how much bright light there is. Okay? Motivation is changed by circumstances. I'm not going to talk about that a lot because it's another way. But we want to have evidence of motivation too. It's related to evidence-based practice. Your reinforcer is not going to work unless the child wants it. Cindy's not going to cooperate with me when I'm teaching her about pocketbook if the motivation is to get away from me because in the past I asked her to do too many hard things or I use slow instruction. Okay? So, anyway, the other aspect of the antecedent are things that guide our responses. Cindy could want to interact with me, and she could want to get that poke on the nose, okay, as a student. But unless I hold this up and say, what is it, there's no opportunity to get that. So wanting something doesn't necessarily mean it's available. I could go run 5 miles in the hot sun and become very thirsty. But if I'm in the middle of the desert, water's not going to be available. Wanting something doesn't make it available, right? Okay. All I'm saying is that the field of behavior analysis takes into consideration these kind of variables and does something about it. When do I want Cindy to say pocketbook? When she sees the pocketbook. Or maybe I want to teach something else. I want her to say pocketbook. Hey, can you find your wallet?
Where's my pocketbook?
Pocketbook. She can say pocketbook to get the pocketbook. Okay? That's a different set of antecedents. Okay? We're also concerned about behavior. Antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Consequences, things either get better or worse for you, on average. These ABCs are critical. The reason I'm going on and on about this is, remember what I've said so far. We have all these meta-analysis that point to behavior analysis being effective, right? If behavior analysis is effective, practices that will get outcomes for your child have to meet these requirements. You have to be able to say, well, whatever reinforcement is being used, is it valuable? Do we have the behavior defined? Do we know what we're teaching? Okay? These consequences of behavior, or these aspects of behavior analysis are important. I sort of implied this so far the whole way through, but language is behavior too. Talking to one another is behavior too. Okay? It's just a movement. Our lungs move, force air over our throats. Our larynx changes position to make the sound wave more or less, that comes out, the sound wave more or less wavy as it comes out. Our lips and throat and nasal passage alter the way the tongue position, alter the way the sound is shaped as it comes out. And as a result of all those complex behaviors, we say something, we make a sound that can affect the listener. Right?
Yes.
Okay, notice she didn't say yes before I said right. My verbal behavior controlled Carolyn's response in saying right. That's what verbal behavior is about. We talk. The main reinforcer for talking is affecting somebody else's behavior, and how people respond to us matter. Okay? So when we talk to other people, there are certain core antecedent behavior consequences that go on. 4 speaker skills we use. One is, and I'm going to use the same word over and over, and I'll do it with my friend McKelly, water. Water. I say water, I get water. Okay, so I'm thirsty, I say water. The antecedent is, I'm thirsty, I saw his water on the floor, and I saw McKelly there, and I know he's a nice guy. If I say water, he'll give it to me. Water, he gives me water. That's one basic form of communication. Want it, say it, get it. We call it a demand. Here's another basic form of communication. Water. And he smiles at me. Yeah, that's water. Okay? So in the presence of this, I say water. I see something, I smell it, I hear it, and I say what it is, and as a result, somebody provides general reinforcement. I don't get the water. People just nod at me. Water! You know, you're nodding, smiling. Yeah, it's water. Okay. But there's another way I could say water. Do an echoic with me. Echoic.
Water.
Water. McKelly says water. I say water back. He says it. I say the same thing. Notice that my response is the same in all cases. Okay, there's still one more way I could say water. Something you drink. An introverbal.
What do you drink?
Water. McKelly says, what do you drink? And I say water. These are 4 ways I could say water, but they're all different ABCs. First case, want it, say it, get it. Second case, see it, say it. People, general good stuff happens. Next way I could say water is somebody says water, and I say the same thing. And in the last case, somebody says something to me, and I say something different. The first one is called a mand, asking for what you want. The second is called a tact, telling somebody what you experience. The third is echoing or echoic behavior. And the last is intraverbal. It means between verbal. Somebody says something, you say something back. By the way, those, if your child doesn't have one of those 4 sets, they're going to have a really hard time communicating. Social communication really requires these 4 things. So, however, most of the time we're talking, it's not purely one of those 4 things. Language is really complicated. So if I could say, hey, what book are you reading? So my saying all of that is a mand for her to tell me the name of the book. But it was also, I said book because I saw the book. And I'm also saying something that she's going to say something different to. There's a lot of language, a lot of complex ABCs in there. What I'm saying is if you don't have one of those 4 basics down, or more than one, it's going to be hard to learn to talk. So teaching these 4 basics becomes really important. Okay, so here's an example of a complex ABA intervention that takes those 4 ways of talking and builds to a complex response. Let me ground you and tell you where I'm going with this. Remember what I said. The large-scale evidence-based approaches say ABA, right? I went through the basic, what is ABA? So if the research says what it is, I should be able to tell you, right? And then I didn't want it to be trivial. I wanted to be concerned about what your kids have to learn. And communication, effective communication, is a critical skill, right? Okay? And I said that there are basic ways you have to teach the child. You have to teach the child to mand, to ask for what they want. Critical skill. You have to teach the child to be able to tell you things that they see. You have to get the child to be able to repeat to you what you say. And the child needs to eventually learn to answer questions when they're talked to. Okay? But those skills all need to come together to make the child an effective speaker in complex situations. If ABA could only teach those 4 basic things and doesn't build to more complex skill sets, it's going to be a problem. So what I'm about to show you now, and you can't really see this too well, is a protocol for teaching a child to engage in complex listener skills. The 4 skills I said were speaker skills, right? Child asks for what they want, the child tells you what something is, the child repeats what you said, or the child answers questions. The child is a speaker. This is a complex listener response. So if I said to Cindy, touch your nose, that's a listener response. She's not speaking, she just touches her nose. Most of us, when we learn to listen, my child doesn't listen, right? Listening is really a complex skill that it helps if the child could speak first before they learn to listen, believe it or not. And I'm going to show you why. The big point here is this is a complicated diagram that simply says if I taught somebody who knew what they were doing to do these steps, they'd be able to teach in a way to get this skill. Okay? And this is called joint control. And joint control is when somebody talks to you and then you talk to yourself, and after talking to yourself, you do something, roughly. That's a very rough. And this spells out the procedures to do it. Let me show you what these procedures look like in action. And this is not a perfect It's not a perfect example because here's another thing about ABA. It's got to be effective, right? It can't be effective if we're asking teachers to do everything perfect all the time. We're all humans, and we're all sort of like the round earth. We're not quite exactly round, you know? We all make mistakes. Teachers will make mistakes. So that's why teachers need methods that are really powerful, that work, okay? And the powerful things that work are the procedures. This teacher is actually an excellent teacher, but she goes a little fast in this procedure. So what she's going to do is she's going to ask the child, give me the blank, the blank, and the blank. 3 different pictures. And then she'll have the child practice. What are you going to give me? And the child, blank, the blank, the blank. So the child's learning to echo what she said. So the child echoes it. Then he echoes it when looking at the pictures. When the echo matches what he has said, or what he sees, he then selects that. So the echoic and the tact, saying what he sees, come together to control a response. What I'm getting at here is that this is a protocol that's replicable, it's based on simple principles, and actually teaches a very complex skill that is central to our human functioning. Being able to do complex things when people talk to us. And this is a simple demonstration. And you don't see it as clearly there, but a lot of the students we use this with, they'll do this. Triangle, bird, tomatoes, Play-Doh. They'll say it while they're selecting it. Okay? And it looks like a very simple procedure. But if I said to somebody in this room, go to the back of the room, turn off the lights, yell up to the projection system that we're going to take a break, and let me know what they say. In order to follow that direction, you have to repeat it to yourself. That's the very skills we're teaching a child to engage in here. Let me show you another one like that. Notice how I manipulated your motivation there, too. I bet everybody said, oh, almost break. One more video and we'll go to break. This is the same skill, same teaching procedure, except varied on individual needs. Okay? So you got an evidence-based approach here, an approach that is derived from conceptually systematic processes derived from applied behavior analysis and is tailored to the needs of my buddy Alexander here. And the teacher, rather than using echoic prompts, is going to use textual prompts. What that means is he's going to read the words to follow the directions. And the reason she changed it to reading the words rather than her repeating it is because he's actually working on a task he uses now in his job, okay? And that is he has to read what's on a bottle and put it in the right place. This was early in the process. Whoops, I did it again, sorry.
Alexander, you're going to make hotel toiletry bags. Let's talk about what goes in each bag. What goes in each bag?
Shampoo, conditioner, lotion, soap.
Go ahead, read it one more time.
Read it?
Shampoo, conditioner, lotion, soap.
See if you can say them without looking. What goes in each bag?
Shampoo, conditioner, lotion, soap.
All right, make one bag.
It's never perfect. Putting your hand in the bag's a little more fun than temporarily. And actually what the teacher just did was procedural. She didn't talk to him. He's reading right in the order he said them. Soap. Shampoo, conditioner, lotion, soap. And he'll work on, that's further down the road, working on stealing it. But what,
Alexander,
nice
close the
belly
bag.
there, Alexander. Okay. What
did you put in here?
Shampoo, conditioner, lotion, soap.
Great job, buddy.
Okay, so the point there is that both of those teachers you saw could tell you how many things the child could remember. Why was that first child working on 4 things? Because he had already mastered 3. And how did they know which things to use? Because they had previously taught them and had evidence of that. Good instruction works in that kind of fashion. So let's take a 15-minute break. We'll come back at about 25 of. Sound like a plan? Enjoy your snacks out there. Yes. All right. I think we do a good job with snacks here, don't we? It's hard to come back after a session with all that good food out there. Yeah, that's true. Okay. So, I went over all those meta-analysis that say that ABA is so effective and that that we need research to select and get us in the right ballpark for selecting what we do with students, okay? But the idea here is that the limits of effectiveness for any established treatment are not set, you know, because if you look at it this way, we're talking about evidence-based practices for students with autism, right? The next question is, which students with autism? Because I have been in lots of schools and have seen lots of students with autism. And I'll tell you what, every child I see has unique patterns of skill that they bring to the table, unique ways of interacting with other people. Their personalities are different. And to say, well, they have autism is the only concern is not enough. It's also what works for this individual. What's going to help this child the best? So the individual's particular history and learning alter the applicability of even the best research interventions, which, by the way, goes back to ABA. Remember, ABA, anything could be evaluated through behavior analysis. You know, you're just making sure how you're teaching it, what's the outcome, and do you get it? Okay, we should start from interventions that are empirically evidence-based, but then we still have to show whether it works. And that's, you know, again, my big point. I've said it about 4 times. Okay, which says, this is one of the issues I have sometimes with evidence-based practice. Evidence-based practice is critical. I'm a firm believer, and it's really important. However, when our efforts to teach become intense research, sometimes that works against us doing meaningful things with students. We need data. We need to show that our interventions are working. But when I talked about those research earlier, and I said what needs to be done to do research, to go through all the processes to get an established study in advance, schools can't do that. That's not what schools are set up to do. They're not set up to be research institutions. I think this quote from Henry Petrosky, let me ask this question. Has anybody read Henry Petrosky in here? He's an engineer, and he writes all these books about building bridges and about paper clips, and just an interesting guy, engineer, okay? Here's what he says about engineering. As I read this, substitute the word teacher for engineer, and it's pretty much the same message. Both medicine and engineering, teaching, do use scientific knowledge and methods to solve relative problems, but neither of them is an applied science. In fact, the practices of medicine and engineering are more like each other than either is like an unqualified science. Okay? So we don't want teachers doing well-controlled, perfectly designed studies in the classroom. What they need to do is teachers, let me read, medical doctors and engineers, read teachers, both welcome all relevant science they can muster. Okay? If you make a bridge and it doesn't conform to the laws of gravity, you're not going to have a very effective bridge. If you teach in a way that doesn't conform to the principles of reinforcement and good antecedent control, your teaching's not going to work. It's a given. However, both engineering and science, neither one can wait for complete scientific understanding before acting to save a life or create a new life-saving machine. Teachers can't wait until the evidence is perfect as to what to do to teach. Luckily, the science is sufficiently developed in regards to the principles I've talked about that for most practical purposes, teachers can use effective teaching practices. But teachers have to know how. They have to receive training and support, and they have to get feedback on their teaching in order to be sure they're doing things that work. And sometimes it takes tweaking. You might have an intervention such as fluency building. For instance, a timing of a child's ability to name things that they see. So you're getting the child to speak more fluently. So you have pictures and the child will do something like say what they are. Elephant, car, key, dog. And they say what they see in rapid succession. And you're looking to increase the number of things they could label in a period of time. Very effective intervention. But to do that for certain students is going to require tweaking. You might only be able to time one student for 5 seconds. Another student might be able to maintain attention to that kind of task for up to a minute. Okay? It has to be tweaked. The idea is that teaching is sort of like engineering. You have to sort of fiddle with the variables to get it right. It doesn't mean that you're pulling things wholesale out of anywhere or basing things simply on your preference. But effective teaching does require sensitivity to what a child brings to the teaching situation and how the teachers respond. There's a sort of an artfulness. Like, I'll give you an example from something that commonly occurs in consultation sessions. I'll walk into a classroom and the teacher will say to me, well, Cameron is throwing himself to the ground and kicking the furniture. What should I do about it? My answer is usually, well, how the heck do I know? And they said, well, and they'll look at me and say, well, what are you doing here then? Well, I said, well, I don't know now. Let's see if we can figure it out together. And then you start asking questions. When does he do it? In what circumstance? What happened right before he did it? What happened right after he did it? How consistent is this pattern? And you then work through all the nuts and bolts of what are the antecedents and consequences of that behavior, and then you figure it out. And sometimes the answers are easy to come up with, and sometimes not so much. It takes a little more work. But the idea here is that engineering effective instruction requires us to forego saying that here's what we want the child to do, here's what we do. It helps to have some ideas of where to start, but we also have to look at the particular circumstances and judge accordingly. One of the things about schooling is that it really requires curriculum, too. You have to know sequences of skills, and what are you teaching next, and how things fit together. My colleague, Amira Stapuglia, is going to be talking quite a bit about that in a session, I believe it's on Wednesday, in which she's going to go over sequences that work together. So what are parents to do in terms of getting evidence-based practice? Well, I think being informed partners and informed participants is important. I think parents are critical to effective educational programs. But sometimes that's not the case. I'm also going to speak honestly. Sometimes parents come in and say, this is what I do at home, and it stops the behavior. Right away, I want you to do it at home. Or I want you to do the same thing I do at home at school. And it may not be effective in the school situation for various reasons. Or what you're doing at home may look like it's effective, but might not really be. And I'm not being critical of any parents. Let me give you an example here of something that my son and I were walking down the street in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and near where my son lives. And there's a house we come to. And whenever we walk by this house, the dog comes out and goes, yip, 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 barks at us real loud. The owner looks at the dog and says, stop that, don't do that. And what does the dog do? Stops right away. But what did we do? We continued to walk on our way, right? Okay? So why did the dog bark? Why do dogs bark like that? Well, often when a dog barks, they bark in order to get somebody to go away, right? They bark and the person leaves. They're barking at you to get them to go away. So the dog barks at us and we go away. At the same time, the person is telling the dog to be quiet. Stop yapping, right? So it looks like the person saying stop yapping works. And it might. It actually might. Okay? But two things are happening. Okay? The dog has yapped, and we have reinforced the dog by moving away. Second of all, the dog has already yapped, and then yells at the dog, and all of a sudden things are good again for the dog. Okay? So the dog is actually being reinforced. Not the dog. The behavior of barking is contacting good stuff. So it looks, and if I say, in my sense of, well, if we ask the owner, does that work? What's the owner going to say? Yeah, it works. The dog stops barking when I tell it to stop. But what's going to happen the next time somebody walks by? The dog's going to bark more and louder, which is what the dog does. So basically, I'm not being critical of anybody in this room. What I'm saying is sometimes we're not aware of the effects of our own behavior. There's some of our trainings when we're training teachers, we say be aware that if you get problem behavior to stop right away, you've probably just reinforced it. Okay? Because if you eat and you have a good meal, what do you stop doing? Eating. Does that mean your eating behavior hasn't been reinforced? No, I guarantee you, next time you're hungry, you're going to eat. Okay? It just means that the motivation for the dog to bark was gone. So be careful. Make sure that you're talking things through with the teachers. Be informed. Being at a session like this, I applaud all of you. I mean, you folks are not here because you're getting paid to do this. You're not here because of any other motivation other than to help your children. And that, to me, is just fantastic. And to take a whole week in the summer when you could be out somewhere else, it's really fantastic. Thank you. And I hope I'm able to provide a little help here along the way. The idea here is, though, that by you coming to sessions like this and other sessions and learning some of the principles and some of the evidence and the skills that work for children, you're going to be able to go back and more effectively communicate with the teams that you're working with. The other thing is, schools, in terms of school-age services for kids, have a lot of contact with children. Kids are in school 180 days a year, there's 5 or 6 hours of solid instruction each day of school. That's a lot of hours of instruction. Schools can make a big difference, but it still doesn't come close to equaling the time parents spend with children. So therefore, the information you could provide to schools in terms of things that are usually motivating for your student, for your child. I mean, what things are valuable to them? What skill sets do you see as the child having or not having at home? That kind of information can be really helpful to schools. And also talking about what areas of need. There are a lot of times where there are certain things that will come up in a conversation with parents that schools didn't know about the child in terms of something that the child is particularly good at, that we could then a school program could improve programming by knowing a child's skills. In being informed, working cooperatively, questioning. I think that the idea is that education has become almost as bad as medical practice and legal forms. There's so much jargon. IEP, LRE, CER, all these terms that ask questions, folks. Know what people are talking about. If somebody says something that doesn't make sense to you, ask about it. Say, explain it to me. And don't think that anybody's going to think you're dumb because you do that. You know? If they do, that's a sign of it actually going the other way. I mean, when you're asking questions, that means you want to learn. You want to know what's going on. And you as parents need to be informed of that. You need to ask questions. When technical terms are used, ask what they mean. Okay? I hope I'm not being too technical in this presentation. I love behavior analysis. You all heard Pat Fryman this morning. I love behavior analysis and the technical language. You can talk so precisely and get into such interesting issues by using fancy terms like stimulus equivalence and all this stuff. But yet that terminology gets in the way if you're trying to come to a practical idea on what are you going to do to fix this problem. You need the technical analysis. You definitely will not get a good, effective program in place if it's not technical. On the other hand, you're not going to get a program in place if nobody knows what each other is talking about. So ask questions. Find out what is the plan about on a practical basis. What are you going to do? What do you expect the child to do? And that's always a good way to go about it. What do you want my child to do? What are they going to learn? And once you find that out, you can ask the question, well, how are you going to teach it? And then the next good question to ask is, how are you going to know? How are you going to know if they learned it? Simple questions that can be really important. And I think, my experience has been that almost all teachers I've worked with are dedicated and are actually working to get good outcomes for students and want to know what will help. The fact of the matter is that it is complex working with children who bring complex needs to the table. Okay? As all of you know with your own children, it is hard to teach certain things and to get to the point where everybody's going to work out a reasonable solution can be a challenge, but it really takes cooperation. And I think most teachers are looking to do that. So sometimes when parents ask a question such as, well, how are you going to do that? That will lead the teacher to say something like, I don't know. I'm going to have to find out. We're going to have to put it together. We're going to have to make sure that you can watch me and you know when I'm doing what I say I'm doing. Okay? In terms of plans, IEPs, and behavior plans, when you read them, you should say to yourself, well, if I read this, could I do what's on here? Do I know what this means? And if I watched a teacher, can I see when he or she is doing it? That's an important consideration. It shouldn't be some hypothetical, highfalutin terminology. It should be practical stuff. Okay. That's the other thing, too. We sometimes fail to sort of exhale and notice when things have been accomplished. Remember, reinforcement works. It's a consequence that increases the future probability of behavior. So if you want your teachers to do good things that get outcomes, make sure that you're noticing when they have gotten outcomes with your student and tell them about it, because that's the strongest reinforcer a teacher can have. No, because teachers go into teaching. You know why they go into teaching, don't you? Because they want to help kids. And they want to help kids. And when they do, that's what makes them want to do more of it. So that word back from folks like you, when you see outcomes, is an important thing to do. I'm not saying wash issues under the rug. Okay? I am saying focus on the practical, make sure everybody knows what each other is talking about, make things doable, make sure that the protocols, the way you're teaching, has some degree of replicability. That's what I just said. If you're looking at what if the teacher says, this is how I'm teaching, you should be able to say, well, show me. And the teacher should be able to show you the procedure. And there should be analysis, too. Basically, what I'm going to get into in a little while is talking about how do you look at data? How do you know whether something is working or not? You all need to be informed about the data that's being collected. And there are multiple kinds of data. The kind of data I'm going to get into is not so much the various standard big group assessments that are done in school. I'm going to be talking more about data related to when they teach, does your child learn it? That's really the important stuff. Okay. So, here are some basic steps related to figuring out what to do. So first thing is you're going to establish a cooperation with teams. You're going to really make sure you know what's being taught, how it's being taught, and if it's working with the data. When you're looking for interventions, this is from the main report. I could have pulled it from the National Autism Standards or almost any of the reports. They're all very similar, although there are differences in relation to the very specific interventions. However, they pretty much all lean in the direction that these are some very strongly supported interventions. Early intensive behavioral intervention, in which particular skills are taught and measured through a behavior analysis, using ABA for adapted living skills, ABA for communication skills, ABA for social skills, for vocational skills, and there's increasing evidence of academic performance through ABA for children with autism. These are all specific to students with autism. And there is a whole list of other academics that are also evidence-based that are consistent with ABA, such as direct instruction. Okay. So, did I miss a slide there? Okay. Here are some interventions with insufficient evidence that is documented in the main report. DIR floor time. I'm forgetting what DIR relation. It's by a gentleman named Gutstein. Why am I drawing a blank on it right now? I don't think about this intervention very much because I don't use it because there's not evidence for it. Developmental relationship. Okay, at any rate, RDI is also along the line of floor time. Basic idea is you follow the child around and let the child do what I'm speaking, this is very rough idea. Follow the child around, watch what they're doing, and the child develops trust, and you develop a relationship, and the child will gain in skills because of this establishment of relationship. And they do present some anecdotal evidence in their reports, but the construction of those studies have not been consistently effective. Auditory integration training, insufficient evidence, and sensory integration therapy, insufficient evidence. I've just picked several for which there are limited evidence out there. Here are some other interventions with also insufficient empirical support. Social stories. And I think the main problem with social stories is that people use them willy-nilly across so many different children. If you have a child and you say to your child, when I clap my hands, stand up, and they stand up after you do all this other stuff, they are able to follow rule-governed behavior. A social story is basically rule-governed behavior. What it means is somebody tells you, when this happens, you do this. If a child can't stand up when they hear a clap, how are they going to engage in the kind of complex examples that are in most social stories? I think social stories probably have some promise if the prerequisite skills, the skills the child needs to follow a social story, is developed. There's insufficient evidence at this point in time for social stories. For teach, and then there's all sorts of interventions that are a little more peripheral, such as putting ambient lenses. There's no evidence for that being effective. David Wilder, who's speaking at this conference, has done a lot of work on advanced warnings. And this is a really unusual one because most people think, well, in 5 minutes, you're going to have to clean up. Well, guess what? There's no evidence that that works. Telling a kid, in 3 minutes, we're going to make this transition. The studies don't seem to suggest that that's effective. What does seem to be effective is sit over here. Way to come over and sit, and you reinforce. And then you gradually build up transition behavior. That seems to work, using clear instructions, reinforcing, set up contingencies. And that's basically what David Wilder's work gets at there. The whole idea that activity schedules, advanced warnings aren't effective would not be worth saying unless there was something else to take its place, and that is teaching the child to make transitions. There's going to be another session at this conference by Willow Hosella that I think is geared, I hope it's geared mostly towards parents, on behavior management. He's going to go over in detail a protocol for teaching a child to make transitions. Yes? It's Willow Hosella, Hozella. Okay, and it's on behavior management. Okay, so basically the idea is if you're teaching a child to, every time you say, oh, it's time to go out in the hall, and the child falls down and screams, and you have a problem, you have a skill deficit there. The child doesn't know how to follow that kind of direction. So what you have to do is you have to teach a skill. And you can't teach a skill by starting at the top of the mountain. You have to walk up the mountain. So not to steal Willow's thunder here, but basically what he's going to be showing is you teach when the iron is cold. Child doesn't have to make a transition. You're sitting here playing with them. Child's having a lot of fun cooperating with you. And you say, sit here. And child comes here and you make it more fun. Come on back. And they make this far a transition. And then you gradually build in longer and longer and longer transitions, reinforcing it, doing it systematically, then varying how much distance. And then they come over here and they have to do something else and then come back. And you teach the skill of transition. And you teach it through gradual steps and through effective use of making sure that when the child does cooperate, things get better for them. I'll give you an example from some of the work I was able to do. I used this example in other trainings as well. But if you, there was a teacher I was working with one time, and the teacher said, oh my gosh, this kid won't come in from recess. Every time we say recess is over, he runs away. It takes 45 minutes to chase after him and cajole him and convince him to come in after recess. He just runs all the time. What am I going to do? Okay. Well, if you think about it, and I'm going to go over some general principles here in just a minute, but to get good at anything, you got to practice. And not only you have to practice, but you have to practice doing it successfully to be good at anything. A lot of evidence for that principle. Okay. So how many times was this child practicing coming in from recess? Once. How many successful times? 0. So what did I do? They're asking me to do. What do I do? Okay, well, I don't know what to do. Let me take something that somebody else has taught me how to do, and I'll try it and see if it works. So I took some chips. I knew the little guy liked potato chips. And I walk up to him and I say, chip. I just hand the chip, and the child takes the chip and eats it. Okay? I didn't say anything else other than stand there giving him a chip. And a little bit later, I stand a little bit further, chip, and he has to reach for it. Reaches for the chip, takes the chip. Okay? Now he's learning, oh, this guy gives chips, right? Yeah, that's a good thing, yeah. That's a good thing. I think he's checking me out. So I stand a little bit further away, and this time I say, come here, chip. And he runs up to get the chip. Okay? So I'm starting to practice getting him to come near me. Then I start moving around in different places. Chip! And the child comes running up to me. Eventually, and by the way, not only that, every once in a while he'd come up, I'd give him an egg, or I'd tickle him, or do other stuff, jump with him. So he's having a lot of fun doing what I tell him to do and coming towards me. And every time after he was with me a little bit, before we were done having fun, I'd say, okay, go over there. I'd send him away before he stopped having fun with me. This way he still wanted to have fun with me later. I didn't get boring to him. So eventually I'm standing at the door, hold up the chip and say, come here, line up. Comes running over. I give him the chip. I tickle him a little bit. Say, okay, go ahead. And he goes away. Okay? And this is all within the first 15 minutes of recess. And we practiced it. We actually got to the point where in that one recess, he stepped over the threshold, walked down the hall, and then I said, let's go back out. Here's the principles. I was simply teaching him to make transitions at times where he's going to need to make them. And I also changed the antecedents and consequences for the behavior. All of a sudden, coming up to me, lining up, coming in, was correlated or went along with things getting better for him. Chips, tickles, eggs on the head. Do you want to see what an egg on the head is? Cindy, you're the victim. Egg! Okay. The egg yolk right there. You might not like it, kids love it. Okay? So all that good stuff was correlated with him lining up. All of a sudden, I had changed, I had altered the value of hearing line up from something to be avoided that resulted in games of chase to line up was correlated with come over, and good interactions occur with somebody else. The teacher, who was watching me like an owl the whole time, picked it up. She knew immediately what to do. That kid never had a problem at recess again. He came in every day line because she followed through on the procedures. Now, somebody could say, oh, well, that Miklas guy, he knows what he's doing. I'll tell you what, I wish I felt that way, because most of the time somebody asks me to work with a kid and I get nervous and I just think, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. In this case, luckily I knew what to do because somebody else had taught me how to do that. Because it's consistent with effective practices. And effective practices mean you focus on what is the skill you're going to teach it in the right condition, make sure that you're teaching it in a way that is replicable and you can tell somebody else about it. Okay? By the way, an advance warning with him sort of worked the way this research up here says it would work. Teacher said, 3 minutes, time to get in. We're going in 3 minutes. And what would he do? That's the time. Oh, I'm going to move, further away. It's almost time for the chase game. Okay. Another suggestion I would make to all of you. Be wary of interventions that other people may suggest to you. There are a lot of things that are out there. When I look on the internet of all the things that are recommended for autism treatments, and you look over what some people are doing in schools, luckily not too many, there are just things that are being done that just don't make a lot of sense, and nobody ever asks about them. Be wary. I encourage you to ask questions. Ask how things work. If somebody says, we're going to do some brushing, or we're going to roll the child on the ball, we're going to provide sensory input, okay, and that's going to teach your child to emit these skills. Well, maybe. Can you show me? What data do you have? Prove it. Because that sounds like by rolling a child on the ball, you're going to teach them to talk without any other procedures for getting the child to talk. It sounds a little far-fetched to me. Maybe I'm just too simple, that I don't know the neurological resetting of all this stuff that's supposed to go on. Maybe it does. I don't know. But it sounds like a pretty big kind of promise. You got to question that stuff. How is it going to work? When are you going to do it? How are you going to measure whether it works? What's your outcome? Be wary. Be careful of testimonial evidence. I had somebody the other day, I'm not even going to mention what intervention it was, but I had somebody arguing with me that the film they were working on showed this amazing outcome for kids with autism. And I said, well, okay. And I saw these parents just spouting off how wonderful it was. And I said, well, can you show me how it works? What kind of data do you have? What kind of outcomes? Has it been replicated with anybody? And he said, well, who needs evidence? If you're going to go to a restaurant, you ask a friend and they tell you it's good. You follow the direction. Isn't that enough evidence? Well, the answer is, if I was talking to somebody who was not reliable and who I didn't know, who was telling me to go to a restaurant, I would be a little skeptical, right? Now somebody who there's evidence for, who was my friend who I've gone to restaurants with, and I know what kind of food they like, and the food matches with my taste in food, and they tell me it's good, that's a little bit different. That's a little more replicable. Okay? And second of all, we're not talking about picking restaurants here. We're talking about teaching skills. And there's a big difference there. Watch out also for the results first being played out on the media. When you see results of some study that miraculously changes children and there's no citations of evidence, and if it's not conceptually systematic, if there's no underlying principle that makes sense to it, be wary. Is anybody here familiar with facilitated communication? Okay, facilitated communication was a process in which children were said to show unexpected abilities to communicate beyond what anybody had seen before, and it involved a facilitator standing behind the student, and when the student was asked to select something on the board, the person from behind provided supportive guidance. And it was supposedly independent. But all of the empirical studies of that show that if I can't see what she is responding to, and I'm seeing something different, most of her responses are going to be based on what I see. There's just an overwhelming, thank you, Cindy, an overwhelming amount of research that has debunked facilitated communication. Yet when facilitated communication came out, it was all over news stations. And it led to just a huge amount of people jumping on the bandwagon about facilitated communication. And it was a real problem because all the time that was spent with well-meaning people thinking the child was communicating on their own, but actually they were controlling the communication. I'm not saying they did it intentionally. I'm just saying it happened that way. It wasted time. It wasted time where real skills could have been taught. And it also had some untoward outcomes as well, such as various allegations of abuse, parental abuse through facilitated communication that had some disastrous effects. So basically what I'm saying is watch out for anything that is initially plugged by the media. And I'm not the media is really critical, having a free press and all that. It's really, really important. What I'm saying is that the tendency is for many writers who are not skilled in the verification of interventions to latch onto a story that sounds good and publish it because it's good human interest and will sell print. I think that we should be, not only autism treatments, but we should be analyzing what is said so that it makes sense in anything we read, but especially when our kids' lives are on stake or are on the line. We need interventions that work. Okay, lack of replicability. If you can't get any kind of procedure that'll be done again and again in the same way and have similar results, then it's probably also too good to be true. Claims of repressed or hidden results is another intervention claim. Well, he's not really doing anything better, but if you look at the sparkle in his eyes, you know he's getting it. Okay? Be wary of that kind of claim. If it's not evident, it's probably not there. We should be able to see what's the outcomes. Beware of people selling stuff. Everybody has something to sell, and people will sell things to you to make a profit. And sometimes they actually believe they're helping by doing so. But there are many things on the market that you need to be aware of. And the other thing is, life is complicated. When you looked at that video of those two children learning to follow complex directions, give me the blank, the blank, the blank, and the blank, and you saw all the little steps that were involved and how long it took me to explain how that principle works, but yet each step along the way made sense. It had to be this complex building of skills. Be wary of somebody who says, oh, if we do this, we'll get these complex outcomes without explaining. For something to work, if you're going to get a car to work, every gear in the transmission has to be lined up. The fuel system has to work properly. Everything has to work. And that's true about instruction, too. You want things that fit together, okay? So as a parent, beware of these issues. It's an important consideration. Okay, so here's some, this is a document from Patton. What I want to cover with these next two slides is simply some ideas that are related to what is effective educational practice in general, not necessarily for students with autism, but for other students. And these were compiled by my colleagues who don't work in the Autism Initiative, and were culled from lots of studies in general education. But the reason I'm going over these things is because I think they're generally true for almost all our children. I think most of these variables definitely relate to interventions for individuals with autism. First thing up there is probably the most important. Students learn more when they are actively engaged in instructional tasks. Okay. You need active learners. I can almost guarantee, I don't know your name. What's your name? Yes. Jan? Shannon. I'm sorry, Shannon. Okay. Shannon is doing something that I would highly encourage. Take notes. Write. When I'm training teachers to learn to teach effectively, I would never present the way I'm talking to you now. This format doesn't allow itself for good instruction. I'm really teaching pretty lousy today, to be honest with you. If I was really teaching, I would be doing something like that. Yeah, you got it. Okay, my hand would be up, and I'd say, what is reinforcement? Okay, the first thing I want you to say is that it's a consequence. What is reinforcement, everybody? It is a? Consequence. Yes, and it's a consequence. Consequence means after behavior. What does consequence mean? After behavior. So reinforcement is a consequence, and it has an effect of increasing the probability of behavior. What does reinforcement do? It increases the probability of behavior. What does reinforcement do? Yes, reinforcement increases the probability of behaviors. So what is reinforcement? It is a consequence that increases the probability of behavior. What is reinforcement, everybody? It is a that. Beautiful. That's the way to teach. That's a much better way to teach, because all of you were not just sitting there listening to me pontificate as if I know what I'm talking about. You're doing something, and I can measure whether you said that. And later on I can give you a written test and say, what is reinforcement? And you can respond that way. Learning is doing. Remember we said applied behavior analysis works because it defines behavior as doing something. So if you're going to learn, you can't just sit there. You've got to do something. You've got to be actively responding. Hence, that first suggestion up there is critical. You need a program where students are actively involved. If you see a class where you walk in and there are long periods of time where children are off by themselves, playing with things, maybe stimming, not actively engaged, beware. Okay? Because learning involves responding to instructional tasks. By the way, I'm not saying the child has to be involved in drills all day long. That's not what I'm saying. Remember, I'm the guy with the egg on the head. Okay? Learning should be fun. Okay? If you're actively engaged in a learning task, and as a result of doing that, things are getting better for you, you're going to be doing it more often. You're going to be actively responding and learning. Okay. The more students learn, the more they will learn in the future. High success rates correlate positively with student learning outcomes. Okay, so here's an example. If I asked you all to define something right now, and well, let me do it. What is a discriminative stimulus? Come on. Tell me. Come on. Don't you guys know? What's a come on. You're all, a discriminative stimulus. What is it? Yeah, not really. Kind of. Could be, but not really. What? Okay. That felt good, didn't it? The point is, when teachers teach by presenting things that are too hard for students, they don't learn as much. When learning is easy, well-sequenced, and teachers reduce errors, students learn a lot quicker. So if I was teaching what a discriminative stimulus is, I would do something more along these lines. Okay, a discriminative stimulus is an antecedent. It occurs before the behavior. And what it does is it's an antecedent, it occurs before behavior, and it signals the availability of reinforcement. So in the presence of the pin, I say pin, somebody tickles me. The pin, and my saying pin in the presence of it, this is a discriminative, it's discriminative for me getting tickles or other reinforcers. The door squeaking is a discriminative stimulus for me looking at the door and seeing this fine young lady enter the room. You with me? It's discriminative, and it's an antecedent that signals the availability of reinforcement. Right? Okay. That's the way you teach without making errors. So back to the pocketbook. She doesn't know what it is. I'm not going to teach this way. What is it? Come on. What is it? Come on. What is it? I'm not going to do that. What is it? Pocketbook.
Pocketbook.
What is it?
Pocketbook.
I'm going to teach, and then I'm going to get rid of the help. I'm going to make it easy for the student to learn, and then I'm going to get rid of the help. Easy learning is good learning. It builds, and people are going to want to learn. Finding that right instructional level where things are easy for the student is not easy, though. That's where the adults have to do good assessments. You have to know what you're teaching. You have to work towards it. Content, in general, should be rigorous and should move pretty quickly. We should, in terms of specified programs for teaching children social communicative skills and language skills, daily living skills, pre-academic skills, all of them should move pretty quick. Once Cindy has this down, and I could come up to her and say, what is it?
Pocketbook.
Yeah, and what's that one?
Pocketbook.
Yeah, and she knows pocketbook. I'm not going to keep teaching pocketbook. As soon as pocketbook's mastered, I'm introducing computer or mouse or window or phone. I'm going to introduce new things so that that rate of learning keeps spiraling upward. Okay? You want a pace of instruction, so this requires teachers to be prepared. You want your instructors to know what they're going to teach next in advance. Students achieve more in classes when they spend most of their time being directly taught by the teacher or by a teacher. In other words, the teacher guiding instruction in ways that are focused, allow lots of responding, errorless teaching, children making less errors, are going to be really effective. And you need a teacher guiding that. That's not to say that you're not going to teach children to be independent. Okay? And there are ways of teaching independent skills that are very effective. But you definitely want to make sure that there is a plan for directly teaching skills. By the way, I want to clarify something. When I'm talking about skills, I'm talking about behaviors that the child engages in. Don't think that I'm only talking about simple things like saying pocketbook when you see a pocketbook. I'm also talking about things like you saw in the video, following three-part directions that are pretty complex. Or it's a behavior to explain the reasons for the War of 1812. That's behavior. A person has to say things. They have to say the British indenturing or capturing sailors on the sea, and the desire to conquer Canada, and all these other variables that might have had, I'm obviously not a historian here. Somebody know the reasons? Okay. The point I'm getting at here is that these are behaviors that you could tell whether I said the things right or not. So it also involves complex behaviors. If you're teaching somebody the skills to use an Excel document to graph data, they're all things the person will do. First, you pull up the program. Then you open a new Excel sheet. Then you decide where you're going to put your data, and you push the buttons to do this. And you have all these skills, these behaviors that relate to running Excel. It's the same principles as teaching pocketbook. You with me on that? And it also requires that these skills move towards independence and generativity. So you want to get to the point where she doesn't only know that's a pocketbook, she knows lots of pocketbooks. That same thing would work for biology. If you have a higher functioning student who's learning the parts of a cell, you know, if you're a microbiologist and you're looking at a cell structure and looking for the mitochondria, sometimes that little organelle in there is this way, sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's this way. And you've got to be able to know the mitochondria from all different angles. It's the same skill as knowing that this is a pocketbook when it's right here in front of her, or it's a pocketbook when she has it turned this way. That's another critical part of instruction. Children become more independent in learning when you get that kind of scaffolding of instruction. When instruction moves consistently from basic skills to applied skills to problem solving and so forth. Critical forms of knowledge, being able to say what something is, being able to do something, and being able to say the limits of when you do something, they all need to be addressed. They're all part of effective instruction. Helping children remember stuff. The first one is practice, practice, practice. That's the basic idea in this one. If a child doesn't have practice doing something, they're not going to do it well. Any skill that is to be learned needs to be done in ways that are repeated. Explicit instruction, I've already talked about that. Having a formative assessment, a tool that can guide how you're teaching. Behavioral expectation, oh, this is a big one. And it's often I'll say this to teachers I work with. You're not going to be able to teach the child to engage in naming things or in following directions unless the child is a cooperative learner. If you don't have good ability to get cooperation from your learners first, you're not going to be able to teach. so that what you have to do is you have to have effective ways of getting instructional control. And I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Data and consumer rights. Parents, teachers, other professionals, and funding agencies have the right to hold prospective providers accountable for delivering quality services, to ask them how they use objective data to plan, implement, and evaluate the effectiveness of the interventions they use. Basically, what I'm saying here is that the Autism Special Interest Group of the Association of Behavior Analysis International say this is a basic right for parents. We should be able to get this kind of information. How are things working? Can you show me if it's working or not? So did I miss a slide there? No. Okay. In order to accomplish that kind of communication, you need ongoing communication, a focus on skill, protocols. I sort of covered this information repeatedly. Here is one way that would help teachers communicate with you regarding your child's progress. What happens frequently is teachers have communication books that go back and forth between home and school. Now, bear with me here, folks. Bear with me here. Sometimes those are very helpful. Like the teacher will write home, Johnny needs more diapers, or Johnny had a good day today. You get that one? Like, Johnny had a good day today. He seemed a little out of sorts. And I'm just giving a few examples. I've read these. It's actually part of our site review process. I read these parent communication logs, and they go on and on. And I think after reading 20 days of this kind of communication, I know nothing about what the child did in school. Not a thing. What did the child learn? Okay, so simple is better. So if you have your child in a program that is providing some pretty specified instruction, set up a system, encourage your teachers to communicate directly with you about what they're actually teaching and what was learned. This would be, you don't even need the time spent. The teacher should be allocating time. You can figure that out. Just have, okay, what area? During intensive teaching, the child learned to tack the prepositions over and on. He mastered those today. So if I said, where is the pin to Cindy? She would say, hold on.
Above the phone.
She would say above the phone. Where is the pin now?
Under the phone.
And she could do that with anything across a full range of examples. That's mastered. That's what you want to know, right? And guess what? The teacher mastered that. Wahoo! Reason to go crazy. That's a good thing. But the teacher then introduced the prepositions in front and behind. Okay? And began teaching another set. And you know what was learned. And now they're also teaching a child to answer questions such, what is a chair? Furniture. Okay? And then a couch is furniture. They've introduced the next member of that class. So eventually you ask a child, name some furniture. Couch, chair, table, dresser. Okay, you got the idea there? But all the teachers do is a very simple note. It takes less time to write this stuff than it does all those fancy notes. Not to say you don't need to know that your child seemed to be getting a cold or needed more clothes for painting at the easel or whatever. You need to know that stuff too. But this is more important, knowing what was taught and what the child has learned. That's really important. And having a simple communication sheet to do that is important. We also need other kind of data that you should see. Maybe not as often, but you should see how children are learning in particular classes. So teachers should be graphing progress whenever possible. We encourage teachers to produce a graph of how many skills a child has learned within what's called a TACT program. Like a TACT program would be what I said before. A child sees something, says what it is, good stuff happens. So a child looks at this: pitcher, glass, napkin, external hard drive, computer, glass, mouse, and the child learns to TACT all these things. Well, you can have a graph of how many different things did the child learn to tact. And you should see that progress. And it provides a summary of how the child is doing in relation to instruction. Graphs are really important. Data is a tool. Data systems should be simple. There are lots of different data that can be taken. And this kind of information could require a lot of detail. But if you have problem behavior, first question you want to have is a simple graph showing how often did it occur. How many times a day did the child scream? How many times a day did they hit somebody? How many times did they try to run from the room? And a graph to show that. This way, if you do something about it and it's effective, you have a picture that shows clearly how the behavior is changing over time. They're really not hard to do. Probe data is often effective. It's not the only way, but sometimes it can be helpful. There's certain programs you can't use probe data for, but for a lot of programs, probe data is helpful. And what probe data is, let's say I've taught Cindy pocketbook. Now I'm teaching her to tack this. First time I present it to her in the day, what is it? 2 seconds go by, or she said something wrong, it's wrong. That day is a no. And then I teach all day. What is it? What is it? Keys.
Keys.
What is it?
Keys.
Yeah. And what's this one?
Pocketbook.
Stomp your foot. What's this?
Keys.
You got it. All day I teach like that. Errorlessly, reduce errors. Teach the whole day. And then the next day I ask her, what is it?
Keys.
She gets it right. So first day was a no, second day a yes. If she gets it right the next 2 days, that's mastered, and I add a new skill. I'm just probing to see. That's an efficient way for teachers. It's not always the best way because it doesn't predict maintenance as much as if I took data on every time she got it right. You don't need to know this. But it's not that different. So it saves teachers time. So a teacher isn't writing the whole time they're interacting with your child. Probe data allows a little bit more efficient delivery of instruction and is very helpful in school settings where teachers are engineers, not scientists. Here's an example of a decision rule. Let's say the decision rule on this graph is if the data is 3 days below the trend of acquisition you want to see, you're going to make a change. Bear with me, I'll show you. So here's the 3 days. 3 days with no instruction, the child's behavior varies from 10 to 20 to 15 times they did something. So then there's the average, and you set the aim line up here based on how much would they make without any instruction, and then what would be a reasonable amount of times the child should demonstrate that skill. So you set an aim line, which looks like this. I'm going through this real quickly. Bear with me. And then you would, there's your baseline. Now you're going to start your first teaching. Oh, first day, good, above your aim line. Second day, oh, below the aim line. Third day, below the aim line. Next day, below. 3 days below the aim line. We better do something. So the teacher makes a change in instruction. First day up, second day, good. Above aim line, back on track, below, below, above, and the child's on track. Whoops. This kind of decision making is important. To have some idea of where you're going and when are you going to make a change. This was just an example, by the way. Very few programs are really this way. Here are some examples of real data from a student who I worked with years ago. And this is the number of mans, how many things he could ask for, how many tacks, how many echoic skills, and cumulative imitation skills. This is matched a sample in imitation, I'm sorry. And it's basically a picture of how this child is acquiring skills in some of the basic operants, which then led to this particular student demonstrating a whole lot of more complex skills. He's shown some really nice progress. So as noted, graphs are a valuable tool. They allow a quick check, and they test to determine if things are working. and if the intervention will actually change what the child knows. Okay. I am running out of time here. We finish at what time? 4. Okay. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. You know what I'm actually going to do? Problem behavior, go here, Willow. Okay? Basically, though, what you need is evidence-based treatment towards managing problem behavior. What that means is you want to make sure people are looking at the ABCs of problem behavior. Problem behavior is learned much like skills are learned, okay, through reinforcement. Why does a child run out of the room? Because something gets better for them when they run out of the room. Maybe they get away from a teacher who's not doing a very good job teaching. Or maybe running out of the room gets them something in the hall they really enjoy. So then what do? You have to figure out, well, if the teaching is causing the child to run away, what can we do to make teaching better? How can we go back? Fast-paced instruction, errorless teaching, lots of responding, good reinforcement. All of those things will make teaching better, and the child might not want to run away because teaching has gotten better. If the child's running out of the room to get something out there, how can you get them to get that same thing in the classroom through asking for it, through being able to control it somehow, and then how do you fade in doing other things in order to get it? These are all principles that we use to establish instructional control. We make sure that the area the child's going to be working at is really paired with improving conditions, that when they come up to the table to work with a teacher or with a group of students, that at the table things are getting better for the student. Immediate delivery of reinforcement, fading in demands, low response time, reducing errors, a fast pace of instruction, all important. I'm going to skip some of this stuff because it's all part of that. And actually what I'm going to do is end with, I was also going to show some data of outcomes of Patton's efforts in schools as an example of evidence-based practice. But what I'm going to do is just show a video showing how in one classroom there were some evidence-based practices put in place which had significant outcomes for the students in it. Keep in mind that this video is not meant to say that what they are doing with these specific students are anything that should be done with every student. Okay? It's just this situation and the level of need for the students in this class. But what I want you to take from this video are the principles of what are effective practice. Whoops, what did I do there? Here we go.
At the beginning of the school year, we visited this classroom serving students with autism. There was clearly a need on behalf of well-serving teachers for additional learning and effective instructional techniques. We were able then to engage services from the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network to provide the necessary skills and structure for the classroom and for the teachers to make a difference for these students with autism.
Exactly.
I've been working with children with special needs for 23 years. It's like being a first-year teacher all over again. I'm a little apprehensive, overwhelmed a little bit. It's going to benefit my kids. It's going to make me a better teacher.
All of the recommendations that are made in the classroom are derived from the science of behavior analysis. It's all evidence-based and aligned with the Pennsylvania standards.
When I first took the training, I was very overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to be doing with all this information? I actually love when they come in, they give me guidance.
This is about having a science that works. This is about grounding your confidence in what you do in practices that are based on evidence.
Training can't be left to chance. Successful implementation of this program requires a staff that is willing to learn new things and then to implement that consistently on a day-to-day basis.
Trayshawn just turned 6 years old. In fact, this is his first full-time experience in school anywhere. He definitely has the intelligence, but his behaviors are at this point stopping him from learning all those things that kids his age are learning.
Trayshawn's VB map assessment indicates that he is able to consistently request 6 items. He can label about 30 items and can also match identical items and complete simple inset puzzles.
Research demonstrates that applied behavior analysis works with students with autism, and we now in Harrisburg have the data to show that it is working for our students.
Cash was a student who came to us with significant problem behavior. He had several tantrums a day which lasted for hours.
He was kicked out of his first daycare center at 2 years old. Every day there was an incident with him. He had no verbal communication whatsoever.
From Cassion's VB map assessment, we were able to identify that he can request about 10 different items. He is also able to label about 50 common items and can match identical and some non-identical pictures.
When we first started working with Sheree, what we saw a lot of was Sheree playing on the trampoline all by herself. What we're trying to do is show her that approaching adults gets her good things. We want them to know that communicating is going to make their life better. Darian is a 7-year-old boy. This is actually the first time he's receiving autism support of any kind. He can be quite a handful. When he first came to me, he would hit me, kick me, but the patent team has helped me significantly in getting his behaviors under control.
One of the key things that has happened over the course of the past year is that teachers have focused on teaching, making sure children are learning important skills, and as a result of those efforts, children are now engaged, they enjoy learning, and there's no need to engage in problem behavior because good stuff is being obtained through the learning process.
This effort helps to prepare students with the appropriate skills necessary to be successful in inclusionary settings, in the classroom, with their families at home, with kids on the playground, inclusion in life. But it all starts here.
When Sheree first came to my room, I couldn't even get her to sit down. By pairing instruction with known reinforcement, I was able to gain instructional control with Sheree. She has gained over 570 skills.
Trayshawn has acquired over 500 new skills this year. His ability to communicate has made his life in school and at home so much better.
Trayshawn was really combative. He's come a long way this year. He's better with his classmates. He's ready to go to school every morning. I'm proud of him.
Within the past year, Darian has acquired about 340 skills. He almost has no occurrences of problem behavior, and he's such a joy to work with. The techniques that we've employed, such as errorless teaching, have led to these changes.
You see the change. And when you see the change as a consultant coming in, it's amazing to see the growth and the progress that the teachers and the students have made in Harrisburg School District.
They are taking good data. They know what they're teaching. They're using assessments to guide day-to-day behavior in the classroom.
Cashion has had an amazing year. He has acquired over 700 new skills.
Cash loves school. He's a totally different kid, verbally and emotionally. Now you can take him anywhere with no problems. He is able to play alongside other kids and invite them in his play space, which is a great big deal. I'm very proud of him. I love you.
It's like a different classroom. All the students are on task. It's miraculous. I don't know what other word to use.
Patent has been the most amazing support that I've ever had in my life. It took me 22 years to realize this is probably what I should have been doing all along. Evidence-based teaching has made me a better teacher because I know I'm making a difference in their lives, and I could see that. I'm making a difference.
The beauty of all of this is the science of ABA, and it's what gives us the ability to be effective with staff and in turn have them be effective with their students.
It's an absolutely amazing and wonderful feeling to walk into Harrisburg School District. It's imperative that this type of evidence-based practice be continued to show the growth and change the lives of the students that they serve.
What a difference a year makes. We're real happy to be back to see kids thriving and working toward lives that will prove to be successful in their own right. Effective instruction does make a difference.
Okay. I'm going to end there and just say I wish everybody the best. There's only so much you can cover in a short session like this. I'm thinking I wish I had another hour to cover some of the stuff I went over. But luckily there's sources for that. I talked about Amiris's program that talks about sequencing skills across ages, and she's going to go over a whole range of skills. Willow's discussion of effective behavior management, plus a whole range of other sessions at this conference that are available to you. Thank you again for being here. And if there are questions, we have a couple minutes. I could entertain questions. Okay. Yeah, sometimes, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
You had mentioned the effectiveness of having a teacher engage. What's your experience with online programs?
Okay, a good question. There is some, I was just looking at a publication. There are some increasing studies that suggest certain distant consultation can be effective in areas where you can't get direct consultation. If you're asking about programmed instruction, there are certain programmed instruction that can be effective. Head Sprout reading is one example of an evidence-based practice that is very good. The thing to keep in mind is that in our age, this is a great question. In our age, and I should have talked about this more, computers and the ubiquity of devices is important, and it's important that children become competent at effective use of devices. So that requires some experience. So some instructional time has to be given to that. But interacting with these devices is a form of communication. One thing that is clear is you can't talk to yourself or to a machine until you've learned to talk to other people. So that teaching machines can augment instruction and can be a good thing to use, but they don't replace teaching the critical skills of social communication interactions. That requires human-to-human interaction. Developing systems that merge the two can be real effective, where you saw a card sort system up there where you have cards presented and the teacher has to flip cards and all that. You can simply put those cards onto a computer screen, makes it easier for the teacher. Eventually some kind of program like that may be developed, and in the process it still maintains the interaction. What's this? Hey, way to go, you got it right, where there's human interaction. You're not going to be able to teach MAMS through the machine. I don't know if you heard me talk this morning, you saw the video of the kid using Alexa. That's an example. The child could never tell Alexa what to do unless he first learned to ask other people for what he wanted. So there are tools. I would not use a hammer to fix my laptop, but I'm not going to use my laptop to teach a child to talk to another human being. You got to get those going first. So it depends. Programmed instruction does have some very promising aspects to it. Yes, Kathy. Okay. Would you say that should be incorporated in sessions as well? Okay. You're asking a very complicated question that would require me to talk for another 40 minutes. I apologize for not being able to give a succinct answer to your question. If you are using an augmentative system to assist the child in communicating with somebody else, there are so many considerations that need to be in place. You need to teach the child to have it with them. You need to make sure that it's functional. You need to, there's a whole range of other issues that come to play here. But technology can be helpful in assisting students to learn to communicate, but it has to be used very strategically and in ways that don't get in the way of actually communicating with another person. Okay? If you use a device, what you have to realize is if you're never going to bridge from device to vocal communication or signed communication or writing, you're always going to have this thing between you and the person who's communicating. So when I'm watching you right now, I'm watching your face, I'm watching your mouth, I'm watching how you respond as a listener, and how you respond alters how much I'm saying to you and what I'm saying. If I all of a sudden do this, I'm losing the feedback. So you got to program for those things. Sometimes devices can be really helpful, but they're not miraculous things that drop down from high and give a child a voice. Contrary to what lots and lots of people say, the device is not a voice. It's just a tool to help a child, and as such, you need to program carefully for that. I don't know if I answered your question, and there's a lot more to it than that. But I'm not saying don't use devices. What I'm saying is judicial use, have a plan, a sequence that's going to get the child to develop a full range of communicative behaviors. Carolyn.
Oh, no, I mean, just before the lecture, I was just going to do this in order to transition my child from the Children's Institute safely down the steps, because he will tear away, go up and down the steps a million times, then fall to the ground and cry. Yeah, I just...
You have a picture schedule you use?
Yeah, I'm just going to try to do this to get him, with the pool being the end result, working towards getting back to the room from the Children's Institute to the pool.
Okay. Well, that may be effective, and if a child has practice with cards and it's successful, you need to do that. If in the long run, though, you're looking to get your child to do transitions, I would back up, and the Children's Institute may not be the place to do this because it's a brief summer camp, and you're not going to have enough opportunities to teach the skill consistently over time. But that's where I would teach that interruption transition process and do that effectively without having all the pictures involved. Because the problem isn't that he needs the pictures. The problem is he's not following the transitions. So just teach him to do the transitions and do it systematically in small chunks, and so that following the directions is paired with like your son's cool stuff. Follow the transition, good stuff happens. Yes. And that's a brief answer. Don't take that as a etched in stone recommendation.
Well, this is a bit of a takeoff on pictures. We try to use pictures for transition. Setting a timer. So he has a certain amount of time in which he uses the iPad. And we'll say 5 more minutes, and we'll show him. And then in 5 minutes, ding, and now he says, okay.
Okay.
Done. We take this, we move to the next. So I don't know. It works. It doesn't work sometimes.
Well, I think,
where Willow's talk would be.
yeah, and something I said earlier, that those early warnings aren't shown to be effective. It doesn't mean they're never effective. But what could be effective about them is when that ding goes off and he cooperates, if things get better for him right there, that he's losing something he likes, but he's gaining something else. That'll be the contingency that stops the problem way more than having any timer. Okay. One thing that does have, be careful with timers. They can be effective, but you have a timer. When the timer goes off, you lose the computer. Tick, 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 tick. Oh, I'm going to lose the computer. I'm going to lose the computer. Ah, I lose the computer.
The timer is, there's a red line. It's a visual. So
Yeah, yes.
And it's red. And then he sees the red, and he would walk over sometimes and just
Yes.
Okay?
Oh, yeah, yes, yes. Yeah, yeah.
And so you go back.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and he doesn't, I mean, that, because what he's learned is as long as that's ticking, I got to play it there. He gets to red, oh, it's coming, oh no. That's where what you got to teach him.
He had the timer for less than 30 minutes. Is this thing on or what? Here I find out. I'm watching him.
Because the skill you're looking to teach is not being taught. The skill is when you say time to leave the computer, you have to make it more reinforcing for him. And I got your point. You need the code. Yeah, because I have to go too. I have another session I have to introduce the speaker for. I am so, please, I feel so bad running out of here right now. If you have questions and they're pressing, you can walk with me. I'll answer questions while we're walking as best I can. If you see me in the halls over the next couple days and you want to talk to me, I would love to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here, and I really wish you the best and successful outcomes with your children. Thank you.